Hello and welcome to the weekly album anniversary recap show for the week of December 4th through December 10th. I'm your host, Caleb, or Caleb the Spy on Twitter and Instagram. Every day on those social media sites, I post about what I call album anniversaries. It's just the anniversary of the album's release date. A couple years ago, I started to track some of these and document those release dates, and I would take time to celebrate those by listening to the album or just posting something online. In the last year, I've added a ton of albums to my calendar, just from people's recommendations to just going ahead and tracking every album I own. And it's really turned into a thing that I do daily on Instagram and Twitter. The problem is I don't always have enough time on those social media sites to talk about everything. There's a lot of posts and, a limited amount of space and characters. So I started this podcast so that I could talk about some of my favorites from the week, some of my favorite posts, some of my favorite albums. Just take a little more time to talk through things. Some weeks I'll have a lot to say, some weeks maybe less, especially as the album anniversaries seem to dry up a little. But occasionally I'll talk about some news, I'll talk about new music occasionally, and just, what I've been listening to. Just a smorgasbord of music conversation. All right, so that out of the way, let's jump in. And the only news items I have are I've been posting kind of daily Christmas albums, and keep on checking that out. I want to hear what other people have to say. I like adding Christmas music. I added a couple Christmas albums, I think three Christmas albums to my library this year, maybe even 4. So just based off what I'd kind of heard, and I'm always looking for new ones to add to my collection. And then next week I'm going to try and break down my favorite albums of the year. I don't know if it's going to do top 5 or top 10. Maybe I'll take a couple weeks. Kind of depends on how busy the show is. But I'll start doing that. Been thinking about top albums. I still am undecided about my favorite album of the year. It's flipped back and forth about 3 times. So we'll discuss that next week. Start talking about it. Maybe it'll be 1 week. Maybe it'll be 2. It kind of depends on how busy or how full the next 2 weeks are. All right, let's jump into a couple of album anniversaries. What's interesting is that, like I said, the album anniversaries kind of dry up a little here in December and through January and even into February. So, there's going to be weeks where this might be a little light. We'll see. One thing I did do is I kind of extended this week. I switched my schedule up. I'm going to start releasing this essentially Sunday night or sometime on Sunday. I think it just works better to do Monday to Sunday as the week. So I had even a couple extra days in here, and there still were not a ton of albums. Like I had three ones that celebrated big release dates, and that was really it. And so I'm talking about all 3 of those, and 2 of them I don't have a ton to say about, but so kind of an interesting week. All right, let's jump in and talk about John Reuben's 2003 release, Professional Rapper. This celebrated a 20-year anniversary, and it is his 3rd album. His first 2 were entitled Are We There Yet? And then Hindsight had come out previously. And off Hindsight, I believe the song Doing, I think it's spelled D-O-I-N apostrophe, was a pretty big hit. I think that's kind of the song he became known for. It's funny. It's musically really good. I think there's like a tuba on it. It's a fun song. And that was kind of the song that really pushed him forward from that album. Move is a solid opening track. I think it was the lead single, and I believe it was, if I remember correctly, I think a couple people mentioned this on Twitter. It was a pretty funny video, and I think this is really the one song on this album that is kind of more joking. The rest of the album is a little more serious. I Haven't Been Myself is probably my favorite song on the album. They get, and I'm going to mess up her name, so I apologize, not that she's listening. Adrienne Camps does the vocals on the chorus. They are great. They're haunting. They're really beautiful. They just fit the mood of the song really, really well. And I think it's my favorite song on the album. It's just an interesting song. It's well done. And that's kind of one of the early songs in the album.
I hope I'm not here for long. It's just a visit. Ashamed of who I become. It's not really me, or is it?
Life is Short is a super catchy song. Lots of horns in there. It gives it a real depth to the music, a little soul to it. It's catchy. It's just a really, really well done song. Kind of more of, I want to say a throwback to his other stuff, but I don't feel like that's true. It really stands out on this album. It feels very different than every other song on this album, but very catchy. I really like this song as well.
Yeah, come on everybody, it's about that. Yeah, come on everybody, it's about that time. Come on everybody, it's about that time. This life is short, don't waste it. All right, this life is what you make it.
Treats, Time to Leave, and Re-Record, those songs all kind of sound like that first album, much more in line with the first album in my opinion, which isn't bad. It's not that these are bad songs. It just feels like kind of a step back. I did feel like from Are We There Yet to Hindsight was I think a big step forward, and these songs all feel kind of similar to that first album. It doesn't feel like a move forward like songs like I Haven't Been Myself feels like this progression or this move forward. Higher is the closing track, and I think it really works. It's an interesting song. The musical instrumentation on it is very kind of all over the place. I want to say all over the place. It feels chaotic is how I would describe it. It doesn't feel systematic. It feels more chaotic. There's some bongos on it, and I think it works as a closing track. I will say I don't love the feature on it, but outside of that, it's fine.
Now what we talking about? Let's go. Oh my, hey, hey, what more can I say? Hey, we gon' keep on pushing on and on.
Look, John Reuben is a vibe, and I'm guessing a lot of people would put him in the category of a bad Eminem knockoff. And is that a fair comparison? Probably not, but I think it's unavoidable. And one of the biggest complaints that I've heard about Eminem in the kind of hip hop scene is that his emergence really kind of brought in a lot of bad, what I would call copycat rappers. These white rappers who just didn't feel like they fit in the scene. Whether that's right or wrong, it is a complaint you hear in the scene. So I think the evaluation of is he the Christian version of Eminem is a valuable interrogation. It's probably necessary if you're really doing an evaluation of John's music. Now, I don't think he is that, but I think it's it's an acceptable question when kind of looking into his music. In my opinion, I do think John was always doing what he thought was right. I think he was a fairly authentic artist. On the first two records, he doesn't take himself too seriously, and I think that's pretty endearing. It is on this record that John starts doing less of the goofy songs, and he starts having a more serious tone. There's also less of those kind of talking intros that he did. In my opinion, it feels like he's more confident in just getting into the song. On the first two records, he does a lot of these kind of talking intros where he's kind of addressing the audience or addressing another character and then gets going into the song. And frankly, I do find them a little tiring on both Hindsight and Are We There Yet? But this album is darker. It's more serious. And production-wise, it's more of a move to a lot more, I think, I am not a musician, but it feels like a lot more live instrumentation on it. And I think it's a more introspective album. There's a more introspective approach, which I think mostly works. But songs like 5 Years to Write and All in All, they don't work for me. Both of those songs are just not songs that I connect with. All in All, I don't like the singing on it. And 5 Years to Write, I don't know. Something about it just doesn't connect with me. So there's times where he also misses on some of these tracks. The other thing that I noticed is that on Hindsight, the production feels a little softer and even richer at times. Some of the samples that he uses just make the music feel more full, where the live instrumentation on this album, I think it to me, it sometimes makes it feel a little shallow almost. Not shallow like, just musically shallow. There's not a depth, there's not a richness on some of these songs. And again, I think the live performances are really good. And again, I'm not a musician, but if you listen to this album with headphones on, they're solid. And they get the job done. There's clearly competent people. John Reuben was on Toby Mac's of DC Talks fame record label, and my guess is he was able to find really good people to help out with the instrumentation. There's not a lot of variation on some of these songs, and I think from track to track it can feel a bit like that. It might be an oversimplification on my part, but that's kind of how I felt. Again, Life is Short really stands out. I Haven't Been Myself really stand out. Higher really stand out. They're unique, they're interesting, they bring something new to it. The other thing that does bug me a little bit on this album is on 3 of the songs, there are these loud kind of beeps, almost like sirens, that just don't sound good in my opinion. They feel really out of place. It feels like in his previous albums, you would have, I think something that would fit better here is an interesting soul or R&B sample to fill in some of that. And again, it would give it more of a richness and a depth than kind of this odd sounding synth beep / siren. It doesn't work for me. I think it was an artistic choice, but it just doesn't work for me. Overall, this album is probably the logical direction that John needed to take. He's growing up, he's maturing, and, you know, the goofiness that he leaves behind on some of those first 2 albums probably makes a lot of sense. I still probably prefer Hindsight in general, but yeah, this makes sense. And I think his next couple albums would be more of this, more of a progression to this, and maybe he would really refine himself with more live instrumentation and some of those things. So overall, I enjoy this album. And yeah, I'm glad it celebrated its 20 years. It came up on my calendar and it forced me to listen to it a couple times, which was probably good. I hadn't listened to it probably in a while. So let's go back 10 more years to 1993, and we're going to talk about Everclear's debut album, World of Noise. So this is their debut album, and it was released 30 years ago. You know, it's about a year and a half after the 90s alt-rock grunge takes off. This album was made on the super, super cheap. I looked it up, and super cheap, and you can tell it doesn't sound as good. I don't have a whole ton to say about this. None of the songs are really standing out to me. It's serviceable. It gets the job done. There's nothing off here that really jumps out. Was really none of these songs were huge hits, but you can definitely see the talent there. You can see the craftsmanship is there, and with a little better production and a little more pop flair, I'm not gonna lie, their next 2 albums are total monsters. I mean, just absolutely blow up. I still really, really love their 3rd album, and the name is escaping me right now. I should have taken better notes, but yeah, just I think their next 2 albums are really good. I would have more to say about those 2, but World of Noise is worth calling out because I saw Everclear once in concert, and their 3rd album I was pretty obsessed with. I really, really dug that album, so worth calling out for me. And there's not a whole lot of big anniversaries this week, so that was Everclear's World of Noise from 1993. The last album I want to go take a little deeper dive into is My Epic's 2013 release, Behold. So this was something that was entirely new to me. This album is celebrating a 10-year anniversary, and I don't believe they've done anything since then. I think this was their last album that they had put out. I did not write that down, so I apologize. I'm doing this off memory. It's a little late. If you can tell, I'm a little more loose than usual. I'm trying to get this knocked out, so I just got the kids to bed, and I need to get myself to bed here. Another long day tomorrow, but this was released 10 years ago. I believe it's their last album. One of the things I do really like about this album is there's an instrumental version of this album available. I think that's always great. I think more bands should do that. I was really excited to see that. I don't think I listened to it. I think I listened to a couple songs off of it. But that might be something I might go back to, is the instrumental version of the album. So I really like when bands do that. I think that's cool. And so again, like I said, this was totally new to me. And this was described as... So I had to kind of look up some information about this band, kind of take some of it in. This is described as post-hardcore, which my understanding of post-hardcore is it kind of takes some of those elements of hardcore, like the heavy breakdowns, heavy guitars, and then it throws in kind of some more melodic moments is kind of how I would describe it. And I like that idea, but I also don't know if the post-hardcore music is really for me. I on my first listen, I'll be honest, I was a little bored by this. Nothing really stood out to me. I think Lament was the first song that I really kind of noticed and really was interested in. So first listen, just not doing much for me till the song Lament. On a second listen, it starts to stick with me a little more, and I can really see the appeal. Again, I wasn't like jamming to it, but was taking it in a little more and could appreciate it a lot more. It's probably not something I'm going to go back to very often, but I know this is clearly a talented group, and this is clearly an album that hits hard for a lot of people, and so this group clearly made an impact for a lot of people. So I can see the talent. I'm excited to check out the instrumental version. Just not really something for me. It grew on me from first listen. I think I listened to it 3 times, and by the third listen, I was having a good time with it, but not necessarily my style. I feel like this post-hardcore stuff ends up sounding a little generic at times, and maybe that's me. Maybe that's my problem, where I just wasn't a part of that scene really. And so I think what I've discovered by trying to be more evaluating music more is I like my rock music specifically, to be maybe a little weird, but also a little pop friendly, which is just a weird combination. But I think that's kind of is. I don't know if it's being a 90s alternative ska punk kid that kind of likes the music that's a little off center, but also, still has some catchy moments to it. So it's probably mostly my musical taste that's the problem here. What I do think is interesting about this album is that it is kind of overtly Christian, and 2013, I think, is when the scene is kind of in this weird spot. So it's an interesting album, but it is overtly Christian. I was reading an interview, not an interview. I was reading a brief review of this album by Eric McCallahan. Man, if I messed your name up, I apologize. He goes by I Never Glow on Twitter. No, that's not right. No, his handle is at In Everglow. He also has a cool blog where he's got some really great lists that he's put out over the years. Really is the kind of the king and the ruler of the CCM Twitter, which is a fun group to be a part of on Twitter. And he was talking about how this album is very worshipful for him, and how it could be, potentially done in more of a corporate setting, but I think he did recognize that it probably is not suited perfectly for a corporate setting, as more for personal worship, which I just thought was very interesting. I don't think a lot of people are looking for more worship music because there's just such an abundance of it, but probably unique worship music could be something that people really hang on to. I know that's why I'm always so excited about good hymn records, is those can be good personal worship for me, if not always suited well for a corporate setting because of how musically complex they can be at times. But I just think there was a very interesting dynamic. This is on one of the Tooth and Nail subsidiaries, Face Down. Maybe that isn't. I don't know, actually. Maybe that's not a Tooth and Nail thing, but I think it was off Face Down Records. And, this is a very overtly Christian album. I mean, you look through it, one of the song titles I mentioned was Lament. It has this very, very overtly Christian theme. I do wonder, again, this is their first album I've listened to, if other of their albums are like that. It's just a very kind of interesting approach. I think I'm so used to this CCM music from the 90s being kind of about Christian things, but not overtly worship, where this felt there was more going for that. And so, I don't know, is that just blending into the scene in 2013, and that is kind of what the scene had become, or was it not? I think a lot of the metalcore bands were probably not doing that sort of thing at all. So this is an interesting album and kind of where it fits into the scene and what's going on. I don't have a whole lot of answers about it, but it did make me kind of think through. And again, 2013, I am almost entirely out of the Christian music scene at that point. Just I had come back for Five Iron Frenzy because they had come back by then, but just almost entirely out of it. So it was, with all that said, my second listen and my third listen, it really did start to grow on me. Probably not something I'm going to go back to super often, but it was interesting to check out, and I'm glad I get these recommendations from people to put stuff on my calendar to check out. So that was an interesting one to check out. There were some other albums that did come out that I listened to that celebrated an album anniversary. I shouldn't say came out. They celebrated an album anniversary throughout the last week, really 9 days, that I did want to mention. First is Upon This Rock by Larry Norman, which came out in 1969. And what I thought was great about this album was I went and looked at the Wikipedia page, and there's just some stellar quotes from people who were really scared of rock music for Christians back in the early 70s, late 60s. One person describing it as bending to the culture, and another person describing it as the new pornography. It was some pretty funny quotes about this album and about what Larry Norman was trying to do. So it's a solid record. I'm not going to put it on every day. My favorite song on it by far was Sweet, Sweet Song of Salvation. I will say the YouTube lyric videos for this are pretty hilarious. There's some really almost awkward, it's not awkward, just kind of weird, very generic stock photos that are going on in the background. So so the YouTube lyric videos for this album are pretty. Next, let's talk about Rubber Soul by the Beatles, released in 1965. It's a great album. Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man are all great hits. Great songs. Sorry, I don't know if they were all hits, but great songs. This is a very, very solid Beatles album, Rubber Soul, a favorite for a lot of people. Let's next talk about The Builder and the Architect by Sandra McCracken, released in 2005. Not her first album, which I totally thought it was for years. This album is great. Absolutely great. So many great songs on it. Thy Mercy, Thy Mercy, My God. Thy Mercy, My God. Ooh, it took me 4 times to get that right. It's getting late. Although, my pronunciation for, a guy who's trying to do a podcast, pronunciation, spelling, not my strength. Not that you're seeing me spell on this podcast. All right, back to The Builder and the Architect. Grace Upon Grace is a great song. The Love of Christ is Rich and Free. I love that song. Absolutely wonderful, beautiful song. Jesus Thy Lord, My Savior is. Awake My Soul, Rock of Ages. What a lovely album. Absolutely great. All right, next let's talk about the shape. Let's change total gears and go to The Shape of Ska Punk to Come, which is a compilation put out by Bad Time Records, which is kind of the preeminent ska punk label at this point. Definitely one of the few labels that's still putting out a ton of ska music. This one came out in 2021. They are absolutely great. Bad Time Records is absolutely great. This is a great little album to check out. Some really great songs by Jeff Rosenstock, Mike Park, and Omnigon are all on it, and some of my favorites. All right, Never Look Back by Goldfinger came out right at the end of 2020. 2020 was an interesting year for Goldfinger. They're a punk ska band that started in the 90s. They've kind of gone through a number of iterations. They kind of went more alt-rock when kind of ska died off. They've kind of come back to more of that ska punk sound. And in 2020, they released a ton of kind of at-home quarantine videos where the band members would film themselves performing in their houses, then they'd cut them all together of some of their old hits. And I feel like they kind of made a bit of a comeback into a lot of people's perspective. Zeitgeist, that's not right. There was kind of a bit of a resurgence for them. What's interesting is, the Mike Herrera, I think that's how you say his last name. He is the lead singer and bass player for MXPX. He joined Goldfinger a couple years ago. I think every time you tell that to people, if you tell that to a group of people, there's a number of people who are into MXPX that are pretty shocked by that news because I don't think it was super publicized a ton. And when he joined, I think they just weren't on people's radar. So anyway, long story short, 2020 was an interesting year for Goldfinger. This is a really good album. It had a couple solid singles. Mike sings more on this album, which I thought was really a nice surprise. And yeah, super solid ska punks. It's more punk than ska album from 2020. Old Brother Where Art Thou came out. The soundtrack for Old Brother Where Art Thou came out in 2000. This is one of the greatest movies ever, and it's one of the greatest soundtracks ever, bar none. Really interesting. Somebody made the comment that this was their introduction to bluegrass. And my response to that was, yeah, I think this was a lot of people's introduction to bluegrass music. 1980 saw the release of the Flash Gordon soundtrack, so 2 soundtracks back to back there. And yeah, it's super fun. It's really a little weird. No big hits off of it, but it's a fun little record. Bull Takes Fighter by Stave Saker came out in 2004. It's 4 songs. They're all good. It rocks. It's just a small little EP, but really, really good. 2 hymn records released by Red Mountain Church or Red Mountain Music. They kind of switched names. Interesting story behind them. They were one of the hymns groups that were putting out a lot of hymn records in the early 2000s. And I think I know at least one of them is not a believer anymore. So by the last album, they weren't really calling themselves Red Mountain Church. It was more Red Mountain Music. I think most of them had moved on from the church they started at. But 2 albums that we celebrated this week were, one was This Breaks My Heart of Stone from 2007, and then All Things New, released in 2010. All Things New is just really beautiful. They're a little slower pace. That's why I probably don't go back to them as much as some of the other hymn records. A lot of more slow paced songs, but just absolutely beautiful stuff. If you want something on in the background that's calming and soothing and some interesting lyrics and really well-crafted songs, great selection by Red Mountain Music / Red Mountain Church. All right, 3 more that I want to run through. 16 Stone by Bush, 1994. Oh man, the hits were so huge. I still think Glycerine is that's got to be one of the better songs from the 90s. Nothing else they've done has really interested me, and I haven't gone super deep. I haven't felt the need to, but solid 90s grunge alternative album. A lot of people responded to that post. Ethan Luck and the Intruders by Ethan Luck and the Intruders. It's a little EP that came out in 2015. Ethan, he does great work. Go check out his music. Go check out this EP. I cannot put a style on it. It's not punk. It's alternative rock. I don't know what it is, but it's great. Really, really great. And then we also celebrated Steve Taylor's birthday. So Steve Taylor rules. Happy birthday to him. He's not going to listen to this, so I don't know why I said happy birthday to him. Steve Taylor, you're the best. Okay, that's it for the week of December 4th through December 10th. Next week, we have, not a huge list of albums, I'm not going to lie. But I also will talk about some of my favorite albums from 2023. But next week, we'll talk about Earth AD, Wolf's Blood by the Misfits, Traveling On by the Decemberists, Sandinista and London Calling by the Clash, Guerrilla Rodeo. Again, I know this was not released in December, but I don't know a release date, so I picked a random day that didn't have a ton of other releases, and we threw it in sometime in December by Guerrilla Rodeo, this little 3-song EP of the band that never was, Hunky Dory by Bowie, Kerplunk by Green Day, Second Hand by Mark Hurd. I think that's how you say his last name, Hurd. That's what it looks like. Hurry Up and Wait by Bite Me Bambi, a little ska band out of LA. In the Middle of It, and No Doubt, I believe 2 albums by Waterdeep. The Chronic by Dr. Dre. Really interesting that was released in December of the year it came out. Very strange. You're Living All Over Me by Dinosaur Jr. and Look to Jesus by Indelible Grace. So that's what we get to look forward to next week. All right, the music at the beginning and the end of the show is the instrumental version of Sing It Out at Street Level by Peg and the Rejected, which is just the Dingees focused on ska tunes. The Dingees have a number of different incarnations. Go check out any of their music by the Dingees and Peg and the Rejected. Thanks for joining me this week. Let me know what you think. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Why don't I get my epic? It's probably a me problem. What are your favorites from this week? You can find me on Twitter at Caleb the Spy with no spaces, on Instagram at Caleb the Spy with underscores, and you can email me at calebthespypodcast@gmail.com. No spaces or underscores in that. If there are albums that should be on my calendar because they need celebrating, please do let me know. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. I've heard that's the most effective way to spread the word about podcasts. And most of all, thank you if you engage with me at all on social media. I do put a lot of time into setting up my daily posts, So seeing people get excited to revisit and discover older albums is a thrill. Thanks again if you listen to any or all of this show, and we will talk to you next week.